Hi everyone, we're gathered in celebration of National Indigenous Peoples Month. My name is Biroba Birangi Saramaga and I am a third year student at Brescia University College.
And my name is Maite Moran. I am a second year student at Brescia.
Today we are here to welcome a powerful Indigenous female activist, actress, dancer, and model, Sierra Jamieson. Sierra, welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
Of course. We're just going to ask you a couple of questions. Feel free to answer as openly and honestly as you feel. We are here to learn from you. So my first question for you today is, as an Indigenous activist and advocate in the community, can you tell us a bit about yourself and your work?
Yeah, so I was born and raised in London, Ontario. My mother brought me into the city because of the poverty that people on the reserve suffer every single day. And she didn't want me to grow up in that type of area. So we decided to move to London. I was pretty much like the only Indigenous kid in public school, high school. I always saw people around me with light skin, light hair, blue eyes, and here I am, this little brown girl with brown eyes and brown hair. And so I always wondered why I was so different from everyone. And everyone told me that my culture and everything about surrounding my culture was wrong. So for the longest time, I was actually very hesitant on showing my true colors, and I was very hesitant on showing people this side of me. But once I started getting into dancing, I blossomed into who I am today. And yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think we can all share the same experience of being like the only POC in any kind of setting and feeling like an outsider or kind of like you don't belong. It's a very sad thing to experience, especially as a young kid.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I actually connect with you, Sarah, that you had something to, as you said, to blossom. I did have that with the sports too when I came to Canada. Yeah, it's beautiful. I also have a question of like, what do you think about this journey you are on as an activist? Like, what's the biggest highlight that it stands for you in this work in terms of the impact that you have made in people's life?
So the journey itself has been extremely hard. Being born and raised in the city, it's hard because I wasn't as connected as I should have been. In residential school, and my grandmother my nana actually was a 60s scoop. So I never grew up around the culture. I never experienced the culture firsthand. So that was always really, really hard for me when I was reconnecting. But it's so hard because, like I said, I live in the city. Most people don't really understand or know the culture itself, and they hear all these stories about what the government has to say or the racist stereotypes, and it's been extremely hard. So like I said in my acceptance speech for the Atlosa Peace Award, you don't have to live by a racist stereotype. You don't have to live behind that mask that society builds you. So honestly, just being an activist and any type of activist is hard because you'll get backlash from anyone, anywhere, and people will say that you're going to be set up for failure when really it's probably one of the greatest things that I've ever done and probably one of the greatest things that I will continue to do. But definitely the biggest reward from doing all this is seeing the youth really start to accept who they are, both as an Indigenous person and accepting their culture. It's probably one of the biggest things that that myself could ever experience because our youth were taken from us during residential schools, and we weren't allowed to do basically everything that I'm doing. So and just hearing people's stories about how I inspire them and how I inspire them to keep going and to keep pushing for something that they're passionate about. That's probably one of the biggest rewards that I could ever get being an activist.
That's amazing and beautiful words, to be honest, because you get to experience the two worlds, and as you said, you don't know where you belong because you were born and raised in a city, right? But it's beautiful that you are open to know your roots and give that as an example for youth who are in the same situation as you. That's lovely, yeah.
Yeah, especially how you say that it's okay not to fit into your stereotype, and that's true. Because a lot of people like judge you based on stereotypes that stem from racist and biased ideologies. And when you step out of that, you reclaim who you are and say, no, this is what it means to be an Indigenous person. This is what it means to be a Black person. They kind of look at you like, not really. This is what I know. This is what I've been taught. And so it's like you're having to re-explain that I'm the person who should be educating you. Can't tell me who I am.
Yeah, and that it's okay to
And
be yourself. That's a
exactly,
lot, yeah.
exactly. And it's a very inspiring story that you've been able to weave with your experiences and your activism. And in one of your media recordings, you mentioned that the female figures in your life have supported you in your work. How does receiving the support from women inspire you to keep going?
So my biggest inspirations are my mother and my aunt and my grandmother. Um, my I only grew up with my mom, and she herself didn't have a great life because, like I said, my grandmother and my nana and all my relatives were either in residential school or 60 scoop. So the generational trauma that passes down from my ancestors to myself has been extremely hard for them. And my mom always told me that she never wanted me to look up to her, when really I do, because she's such a strong and powerful woman. Same with my nana. She was a 60 scoop, and she managed to have 2 kids and love her grandbabies and trying to reconnect with the culture. And honestly, the biggest reward that I can get from the support of my loved ones and those who I look up to, such as like my mom or Serena Fox, for example. And I think the biggest reward is to actually tell our truth and to tell our stories. Because back then we couldn't do that. We couldn't share our teachings. We couldn't share who we are to others because it was wrong and it was looked down upon us. But me stepping up and taking that initiative to break the intergenerational trauma that's been happening in my family has been one of the main things that I have, because my ancestors didn't have a voice, but they fought hard so that I could have a voice and that I could be here today and talk about these things. It's truly rewarding to get all this love and support from people. It makes me realize that people listen and that they see and that they hear me. And once one person starts to listen, then others will start to listen. It's a domino effect.
Yes.
Exactly, yeah.
I also heard that you landed an acting role with Future History TV. What was like, and what did your role initial?
So basically, Future History TV was more of like a documentary. So Serene, I got to meet her, which was probably the best moment of my life.
Oh.
Um, I have looked up to her and loved her since I was very, very young, because you don't really see Indigenous women in the media. More recently you have, but when I was growing up, you never really saw them. When you did, it was more of like a stereotype. They're doing drugs, you know, they're drinking or whatever they're doing. I don't watch the stereotypes, but it was basically, she was trying to reconnect with the culture and learn more about the culture from other tribes. So when she came to Toronto to meet with two other very strong people that I know, who took me under their wing to mentor me, they asked me if I wanted to come and do this interview with them. And they said it was for Serene Fox. And as soon as they said Serene, I was like, yes, I'm doing it. So I traveled to Toronto and I stayed with them for a little bit. And we basically talked about very important things like the MMIW movement and how that affects me and how that affects Indigenous women in general. So it was just a really cool experience to be a part of. And I'm forever grateful for the two people that I have in my life to be able to put me in something like that, and meeting one of my role models. That was probably, it was a really cool experience, and it's probably still going to be the coolest experience I ever had.
Oh.
Yeah, I can only imagine.
Yeah.
So talking about your activism, part of it is the fight against human trafficking, and you've done some work with that kind of initiative. And I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit about what it is that you do to try and fight human trafficking.
Yeah, so Indigenous people in general, I believe they make up about 3% of Canadian population. But when it comes to human trafficking victims, over 50% are Indigenous women or Indigenous men. So most people don't really talk about human trafficking, but when they do, it's very sugar coated, and you know, they don't actually hear the stories that survivors have to say. You know, I know so many human trafficking survivors that I consider now as sisters, and hearing their stories and hearing their pain is probably one of the hardest things to really sit there and listen to. So I dabbled into, like, I kind of dipped my toe into human trafficking and really starting to do my research about last year, because I was just like, you know, I want to learn more about what this is. I want to see more. I want to know more. And I'm a very curious person, so I want to do my proper research and get my proper resources. So I've done whatever I can due to COVID to really try my best to talk about human trafficking, especially on my social media posts, because, you know, like I said, not too many know that it happens in Canada. Not too many people know it happens in London, but you would be surprised with everything that's happened. And you know, human trafficking is probably one of the biggest issues for human trafficking. MMIW in general are probably one of the biggest things that happen to Indigenous women, Indigenous people. So I think it's extremely important to do your research, to listen to stories of these survivors, and to really acknowledge that something like this is happening in our country.
And in our city, because yeah, I do believe in London we have a lot of that, sadly.
A lot. Yeah, it's very challenging too.
Well, talking about challenges, have you personally faced as an Indigenous woman in the activist work? You have, like, what kind of challenges or have you personally faced as an Indigenous woman in the activist work that you have done?
I faced a lot of challenges, especially in high school. I planned my first ever South's first ever powwow, or gathering as they want to call it. And I was the one that started the FNMI council, because I felt like that was something that needed to be done and something that needed to be started. But it was definitely challenging, especially for the 150th anniversary of Canada. My principal asked me if I could write a speech on residential schools, since, you know, the whole history behind residential schools, and like how Canada became Canada really surrounds itself around residential schools and the
Yeah.
cultural genocide of Indigenous people and Indigenous children. But definitely my teachers, I want to say a lot of them were very supportive of my activism, and they're still very supportive of it. But there were some that kind of told me that I would never get to where I wanted to go because I was an Indigenous woman. I couldn't do certain things because I was not only a woman, I just so happened to be Indigenous too. So they automatically set me up for failure. They automatically expected me to fall. And so when I didn't, and when I decided to pick myself up and keep going, I think they were kind of stepped back, and that's when they kind of realized that it's going to take a lot to take me down. You have
Yeah.
to do a lot of things just to be able to take me down. But I have faced a lot of challenging things that made me sit there and think, like, maybe I shouldn't do this. Maybe, I don't want to do this. But at the same time, I'll sit here and I'll think about it every now and then. If I don't do it, no one else will, because no one feels like they have a voice. And if one person, I always like to say, I want to be that candle that starts a huge fire in society or in the justice system. So that's kind of what I go by.
Yeah, that's actually very, very nice the way you put it. And well, first I want to talk about high school. I do believe that high school, we have so many problems in high school that are not spoken. There is racism sugar coated in every single corner. I do believe in that. I was bullied too, but I was like, it doesn't matter, right? And I love the fact that you said like that people were pushing you down, but they didn't know who they were talking to or what they were facing to, and you were like, you know what? Yeah, push me down, because the more that you push me down, the stronger I come up, and I love that. And that's such a nice example to put outside. I just love it. For young children that's gonna watch these, or parents that are gonna watch these, it's such a good example. I love this.
Exactly, especially considering that I know so many people of color, Indigenous, like who Latin Americans, everyone has had some kind of negative experience with a school official. And maybe it's not intentional, maybe they're so oblivious to the fact that they're given into stereotypes, like, compartmentalizing, oh, well, these kinds of people, this is usually what they do, maybe you should do this. They don't encourage you to think outside of the box, and they don't tell you and give you confidence that you can be whatever you want to be. Your physical appearance has nothing to do with that. The way you present yourself has nothing to do with that. And it kind of goes to show that there's still very many things within the community that have to change. And it starts from an educational point of view. You can't just tell someone, you have to teach them. And so as the Brescia community, what steps could we take in order to support the Indigenous communities in Canada?
Honestly, what you guys are doing right now is probably a giant step into really helping the Indigenous communities. When it comes to, this type of stuff, even just like the small things, even the baby steps, it's fine to take those, because then those turn into bigger steps. And then, like even just you and me sitting here right now, and you guys interviewing me, that's already a giant step to take. And allowing me as an Indigenous woman to speak my truth, me as an Indigenous woman to sit here and be held up as an activist, and having you guys, you know, really sit here and listen, and the willingness to really learn and to want to acknowledge the Indigenous people is probably one of the greatest things that you could ever do. I'm going to try not to tear up because I can feel it happening. But
It's okay.
honestly, everything that you guys are doing right now with asking me to be interviewed and to listen to me talk is probably one of the biggest steps that you can take, and then continuing to ask more and more Indigenous people to talk and to share their stories and share their truths. That's the number one thing that you can really do, and it's something that will show the youth, hey, look at what these people are doing. You know, you can be like that. You don't have to get beat up by non-Indigenous people. You don't have to sit there and feel like you're not worth it. You don't have to feel like you're not heard, because you are heard and you are seen. Trust me, it takes a lot. I have been through probably hell and back. I don't know if I can say that, but I have been through hell and back. And the fact that I'm having more people reach out to me and wanting to hear my stories and wanting to hear my truth is the biggest step that you can take.
I'm glad we can give you a platform to speak your truth and talk about the things that really need to be talked about, that have for so many years been kind of put under a blanket, that it's gotten to a point where some generations don't understand the impact, or they don't understand how, you know, the Indigenous community has really suffered from the moment Canada was created. And so we thank you so much, Sierra, for joining us today and for teaching us, for talking about your journey and your experiences. And we hope to connect with you soon.
Yeah, and I hope to meet you too in person, because it's been a wonderful experience. Such a full of education, and yeah, it's just feels complete.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was truly my honor.